The term Gnostic gets thrown around a lot these days.
And I just started to read the Gnostic texts myself. This is what really finally allowed me to put it together.
Often by slop oil salesmen like James Lindsay, to the point that it's basically lost its meaning. But you do interestingly now see very explicit Gnosticism in the increasingly popular conspiracy theory world. David Icke, for example, whose work has made something of a comeback on social media, is basically a Gnostic in the proper sense. 3rd, 4th century Christian heresies that believed the world was made by an evil or at least immature demiurge, so that physicality, nature, our bodies are not the creation of the true God.
Gnostic belief system talk about this archontic force, which they say takes form and manipulates human society. Indeed, they say, and it fits massively with what I'm saying, too, that this reality was actually created by that force, this reality we're experiencing through the 5 senses.
Now, to be fair, this definition and this term, Gnostic, does not do justice to the different sects that get labeled Gnostic. Some of their myths have a deeper meaning, so I prefer to use the term world-weary or world-denying. The idea that our politics in the modern world are Gnostic originates with Eric Voegelin, brilliant political philosopher. Quote, "The world is no longer the well-ordered, the cosmos, in which Hellenic man felt at home, nor is it the Judeo-Christian world that God created and found good. Gnostic man no longer wishes to perceive in admiration the intrinsic order of the cosmos," end quote. Voegelin connected the Gnostic impulse to reject the world to Prometheus. In Aeschylus's play, Prometheus famously utters the words, "I hate all the gods," which Marx quoted as the slogan of philosophy in his dissertation. But I would make a whole separate video about Prometheus, because I think Voegelin doesn't do it justice. The idea is that the Promethean drive to liberate man from the gods and remake the world, what Voegelin famously called immanentizing the eschaton. So the eschaton is the end times, the apocalypse, full divine revelation, but you want to have it immanent, meaning in the world, in time, in history, as a physical reality. Instead of something spiritual that transcends history, it becomes a completely historically bound physical reality. And, the techno-singularity is very much this idea, very much what Voegelin is criticizing. You can understand why Voegelin connects these ideas, the Gnostic rejection of the world and the desire to completely upturn every authority, every god, and remake the world according to our will. Because if the world is arbitrary, just the product of a mad or evil demiurge, you should either escape it completely or take it over and remake it. Totalitarian social engineering, rewriting nature, rewriting genetics, or complete dropout. When you reject the lower for the sake of the higher, right? You reject the body for the sake of God. You don't reach the genuine higher, you reach a parity. So as an analogy, if I neglect my body's health because I want to pursue the intellectual life, the quality of my thinking will suffer eventually. It might cease entirely because I eat poorly, because I fail to exercise, and so I die prematurely. That would really get in the way of my academic research, right? Of course, I don't mean that you should care for lower things before addressing higher things. You should actually set your sights on the higher, right? The seek ye first the kingdom of heaven, and all these other things shall be added on to you. Teaching that we find in the gospel is a good one. It's true. Live from the end. Focus on the higher good. But doing justice to the higher good doesn't mean doing violence to the lower goods. In other words, what you're looking for here is for pursuit of the higher good to cascade down into care for the body, care for the household, for the family, for the environment, all these other things. The mistaken mentality, the mentality that you gain transcendence through transgression, is, for example, what St. Irenaeus describes in his polemical description of the Carpocrates. A Christian heresy, he tells us, quote, maintains that the world and the things which are therein were created by angels greatly inferior to the unbegotten Father, the archontic powers that Icke was talking about. And they deem it necessary, therefore, that by means of transmigration from body to body, souls should have experience of every kind of life as well as every kind of action, unless, indeed, by a single incarnation, a single lifetime, one may be able to prevent any need for others By once and for all and with equal completeness doing all of those things which we dare not either speak or hear of, nay, which we must not even conceive in our thoughts, in order that, as their writings express it, their souls, having made trial of every kind of life, may at their departure not be wanting in any particular. It is necessary to insist upon this, lest, on account of some one thing being still wanting to their deliverance, they should be compelled once more to become incarnate." End quote. So they have to commit every possible act, every possible sin, including unspeakable things, because that's the only way to end the game of life, to end the reincarnation cycle. You exhaust this lower world created by these lower creatures, these angels that are fallen or whatever it is, and then you can leave it. You've also got Epiphanius of Salamis, who discusses the Fabianites or Borborites, who describes transgressive rituals that they engage in, which include abortion, which include cannibalism, actually, on children. Again, these are polemical, but there's no reason to suppose there weren't extreme transgressive sects out there who had the sense of violating this world or exhausting this world through sin in order to be liberated from this world. But that's definitely the equation Voegelin and others are building on. That if you really reject this world, if you really hate this world, you're going to want to destroy it, but you're going to want to transgress against natural boundaries, natural morality to get beyond it. And you do get this with modern occultists. They are out there, and you can be unfortunate and sort of encounter some of these people that really do believe in committing terrible acts for the sake of some misguided concept of transcendence. Transcendence through transgression. The idea that you should experience everything, commit every act, no matter how monstrous, in order to know everything this reality has to offer and so go beyond it. This reality doesn't actually have differences of quality between what's good and what's bad. It's all just one thing, so you can just experience every act as though it were the same as every other act. Relates to the idea that you break the limits of nature and morality and psychology by committing horrible acts to see past this reality, this matrix, and establish contact with that which is outside those limits, the true God, according to these Gnostics, who is a kind of terrible Cthulhu demon beyond comprehension. So you can't reject the lower for the sake of the higher and reach the higher. You end up reaching something that's distorted. So Icke Voegelin's point is valid. He thinks that this is what's happened with modern thinking. The drive towards liberation from old forms and traditions and so on that you get with some Enlightenment thought and with the French Revolution and the whole history of political modernity is a desire to escape from the world. And you end up escaping towards a false universality. Let me give an example. Money, divorced from the real economy, real jobs, real people's needs, real production, ends up as speculative, overblown finance. And the ability of a few speculators who are well positioned to allocate vast resources to unproductive economic sectors. Erotic desire divorced from gender polarity, the formation of families, ends up as perversion. Technology divorced from love for the human form ends up in transhumanist atrocities. Wealth and influence divorced from responsibility to a people, commitment to an organic community, ends up as the reckless, destructive exercise of power, oppression, tyranny. I mentioned all this in connection to Epstein in another video. So the modern political focus on the idea of liberation or freedom from religion, from hierarchy, from old national and ethnic identities, from patriarchy, whatever, has ended up in this kind of divorce. You end up breaking limits, rejecting structures you thought oppressed you, and maybe a version of them was indeed oppressive because it had become too rigid. It had lost its original purpose. But by rejecting it wholesale, you end up adrift. You don't get something better. You end up free of religion, but with existential dread and sort of incoherent materialism. You end up free of hierarchy, but you have more crime. You have a society without standards. You end up free of national identity, but you end up with social atomization, open borders. You end up free of patriarchy, but you end up with plenty of divorce and abortion, etc. So your freedom is a fallacy. Your freedom is a joke. In other words, Icke Voegelin's point that there's this Gnostic rejection of the world in the liberation that political modernity offers us is valid. The term Gnostic is not great because the actual Gnostic heresies were sometimes fitting into this idea. They were transgressive and they really rejected the whole physical world, but some of the groups that got labeled Gnostic are not that. I'm actually a fan of the Gospel of Philip, for example, the Gospel of Thomas. A lot of the Nag Hammadi writings are fascinating and spiritually edifying in my view, for example. So I'm going to use the term Gnostic here, but I prefer the term world denying. I want to give my take on why this becomes prominent, but first, a story.
This brings us obviously to the CIA's project Looking Glass. Essentially, there were these whistleblowers, like I told you, in the military and within the CIA apparatus that came forward to reveal that the deep state had a technology. They stole a device from the ancient Sumerian civilization that's located in modern-day Iraq, and they incorporated it into a computer, and suddenly they're apparently able to predict future outcomes. Just imagine the deep state being able to see different outcomes. I mean, the amount of power that you would have, and then also fathom in your mind that the people that are Satanists have this power. Take a listen.
Project Looking Glass, a technology that could supposedly view potential future timelines.
The project was shut down because there was a problem when we approached 2012. You find out that at the end of 2012, in an easy way to put it, the choices that we make become less and less consequential to the future. And eventually we're pushed into this bottleneck of time, no matter which choice we make.
Okay.
That's roughly the lore around Project Looking Glass, a long-standing classic of modern conspiracy theory pseudo-history, which Candace Owens has now adopted into her investigation of the death of Charlie Kirk. After dreaming about her former colleague and longtime friend, dreams she takes to be visitations from his soul, which is in purgatory, meant to guide her towards his true killers, Owens concluded that Kirk was somehow critical to determining which future ends up coming to pass, or something to that effect.
You just cannot pretend that all of this is one big unhappy coincidence. So when for the first time in his life, Charlie peeks his head up and starts to push back in a meaningful way, and they panicked, they freaked out. And their solution was, no, just kill him. Just kill him.
And none of this is to say that I believe the official story. There's inconsistencies there, but I mean, the way that she goes about constructing her theories is obviously spurious to the extreme. One of the main supposed whistleblowers for Project Looking Glass, Bill Wood, the one whose interview Candace Owens showed on her show, also blows the whistle, supposedly, on the fact that humanity was created to be slaves by an alien race. That kind of thinking easily veers into the idea that, well, if our whole culture and even genetics are the creation of a tyrant alien race, we should just scrap the whole thing. That's the kind of transhumanism that you get with a Giorgiani type. It's a modern Gnostic mythology. I think we can describe the ancient alien theory and a lot of what goes with it as the modern pop culture Gnostic myth. And that's what Candace Owens has turned herself into a gateway for. She treats these guys, who also talk about that and contradict Christianity in all sorts of specific ways, as authorities when building her narratives. That should be concerning to her religious followers. The full scope of Project Looking Glass theories seems to rely on Zecharia Sitchin's amateurish and debunked, but once extremely popular, readings of ancient texts. Sitchin, if you don't know, wrote a bunch of books about how ancient religious texts are really about aliens visiting humanity, or creating humanity rather, and then visiting it periodically to keep tabs on their creation. The story goes that the Bible and other religions contain clues, accounts of the Anunnaki, but also providing a comforting gloss over the terrible truth that we are nothing but upgraded chimpanzees meant to mine gold for our tyrannical space parents. That's what Sitchin thinks, by the way, that we were created to mine gold. They need gold. This sci-fi, materialist, cosmic, and anthropological pessimism obviously runs counter to Owens' Catholic religion, but these are the kinds of waters that she's swimming in, the sort of lore that she's tapping into. And it does seem to resonate with her theory that a vast, coherent power elite ties everything together, from Sumerian technology and time travel, rewriting the timeline, which resulted in the Mandela effect, she thinks, the US deep state, Zionism, the assassination of Kirk, Brigitte Macron's alleged transgenderism, and her spiraling into the more outlandish side of conspiracy theories does coincide with their general prominence today. As I've said, authors like David Icke and Jason Giorgiani are more or less in vogue lately. These ideas take Sitchin's thesis that our very biology is the product of despicable entities, tyrant aliens, way further by theorizing that our whole reality, including the afterlife for Icke and Giorgiani, is a matrix-like simulation programmed by nefarious powers. They're basically keeping our consciousness, our soul, in prison in this reality, recycling it, reincarnating it in this false world. At the root of this world is evil. What unites the things of this world, what gives things their common ground, is a shadowy entity that designed it all. So everything becomes suspect. Every pleasure, every institution, every characteristic or identity, every form, every condition ultimately is part of it. You can understand how this would lead to a politics of preferring uniformity. The religious believe the world is fallen, corrupted, but it can be set right, spiritually conquered, baptized. And the fundamental differentiations, the fundamental realities that make up life, the life of this world, gender, family, the nations, even much of what emerges from human culture over the course of history, are not the creation of evil, which has no real creativity of its own, but of God or divinely inspired persons. The Gnostic has to destroy it all, make it all one, like the true God who is outside this world, who is not responsible for the messy diversity of our reality. You end up with a parody of apophatic theology. God is totally transcendent, but in the sense of being outside this world, so he's not really present or all-powerful within it. The psychology here is of constantly being on guard, constant criticism, suspicion against the things we encounter. Beautiful things invite us to contemplate, to relax the problem-solving mind. The Gnostic attitude, in contrast, is constant critique, rejection, and anxious escape. Gnosticism might be what happens when we try to remedy the disenchantment of the world by finally rejecting the world rather than re-enchanting it, right? A harder thing to do for most people, to discover the spiritual meaning of the world, to interpret nature, the body, the psyche, as a very often distorted, fallen, but still ultimately legitimate expression of higher realities. Because it's this idea of the world as icon, as the interplay of the names of God, that Gnosticism must reject. For a diagnosis of today's Gnostic conspiracism, we may turn to Spengler's concept of the second religiousness, Oswald Spengler, a kind of degenerate return to religion at the tail end of a civilization, the rejection of body and world, the feeling that there's something of cheap stage design about the whole of reality, is world weariness at the extreme. Consider this quote from Spengler's Decline of the West. Quote, "At last, in the great dawn of civilization, the fire of the soul dies down. The dwindling powers rise to one more half-successful effort of creation. Then finally, weary, reluctant, cold, it loses its desire to be, and as in the Roman Empire, wishes itself out of the overlong daylight and back in the darkness of proto-mysticism, in the womb of the mother, in the grave." Basically, the second religiousness is the end of critical thought and reason. It comes after the calcification of a culture, right? So he writes, quote, "From skepticism, a scientific or rational mentality, there is a path to second religiousness, which is the sequel and not the preface of the culture. It comes after a culture, right? It's a sign of decline, not of something new about to be born. Men dispense with proof. And how? They desire only to believe and not to dissect. The individual renounces by laying aside books," end quote. And this is why I've used Owens. She is sort of on the path, in my opinion, to Gnosticism. She's a kind of connecting tissue between mainstream religious ideas, her adopted Catholicism, and the Gnostic element of extreme conspiracy theories. But she's very much a sign of that second religiousness, which doesn't want rational proofs, rigor. It jumps from one thing to another. It's very fuzzy. The second religiousness keeps the skepticism about nature, the human condition, life, from the era of sort of post-religious materialism, which every culture goes through for Spengler, and then siphons that disenchantment back into religious experience. It infects the numinous with it. The conspiracist is ever skeptical of received truth, right? He keeps that aspect of rationalism, and somehow that lands him in the most fantastical of faiths, in just these very elaborate systems of belief, because he doesn't take any consensus for granted. From the religious believer's perspective, which was not Spengler's, he wasn't religious, there is always something demonic about the second religiousness. It's basically René Guénon's pseudo-tradition, or counter-tradition, which are probably better terms. From Guénon, quote, "Pseudo-initiation is only one of the products of the state of disorder and confusion brought about in the modern period," end quote. This is approximately where Owens is, but pseudo-tradition can eventually be led from fallacy to fallacy until its conclusions run directly counter to actual metaphysics, at which point Guénon would speak of counter-tradition proper. Then we have not only a parody, but an inversion of religious meaning. Dispense with proof enough, and you end up dispensing with your own soul. If high reason was still able to contemplate the mystery of being, to follow arguments for metaphysical necessity, Proclus and Avicenna, Aquinas, that high reason died and entered rigor mortis with the advent of scientific determinism and materialism. That's the stiffening of the corpse. And then this has in turn given way to the softness, the morbidity, the phosphorescence of putrefaction, the shine of the rotting corpse, which some confuse for the light of dawn. That's the second religiousness. It comes after materialism, and it's even worse. It's a parody of religion. Reason gives way to mere rationalism, which gives way to irrationalism. Metaphysics gives way to materialism, which gives way to fuzzy-headed mysticism. Spengler again, quote, "Classical science faded out and made way for the world outlook of the second religiousness. And from this it is possible to foresee a date at which our Western scientific thought shall have reached the limit of its evolution," end quote. Our moment in history really cycles through these super quickly, vertiginously quickly. Our own lifetime's unique atheism was the kind of shallowness of Richard Dawkins, who didn't really understand Aristotle's concepts of vertical causation and so on. He wasn't engaging with classical arguments for God at all. And now we have the schizo-posting meme theories of the second religiousness. That's the sort of degeneration we deserve. We might hypothesize that it arises as a function of the twin features of highly developed but decadent cultures. One, too much information, and two, no clear center around which to organize that information. Civilization has kind of lost all of its central spiritual ideas. When a civilization complexifies beyond a certain point, owing to the addiction to novel stimulus, ever new, that results from technical sophistication and economic integration, the importing and refining of every manner of entertainment and product. In our era of doom-scrolling, endorphin-releasing, desensitizing, esoteric rabbit-hole diving, this is truer than ever. And stimulus addiction meets with awe at the system. The Leviathan impresses us, even in spite of ourselves. It's capable of near magic, after all. Home delivery of Chinese-made everythings, electrical grids, wireless internet, even locking up vast swaths of humans in their homes during the pandemic. Then there's the sense that the people in charge, at the very least, err on the side of evil. Many of those who rightly perceive the institutions around them as destructive are also addicted to producing or consuming ever new, ever more complex explanations for why those institutions do what they do, and are unable to discern the dynamics and players involved, collapsing these together, joining what dots seem most narratively suggestive to them. The inner chaos of these types, as symptom of civilizational decline, was diagnosed by Nietzsche in Beyond Good and Evil. Quote, "In an age of disintegration, a person will have the legacy of multiple lineages in his body, which means conflicting drives. A man like this of late cultures will typically be a weaker person. His most basic desire is for an end to the war that he is," end quote. What the mad prophet Nietzsche takes to be the result of mixing between contrasting lineages, we can also account for as the product of access to too much information. In an age where culture no longer has a clear center. So you weren't educated with a clear center, and you have many different theories and ideas in your head. So you're a conflicted person, you're a broken person on some level, an incoherent psyche. In addition to Nietzsche's two possible fates for that kind of chaotic type, to seek to sleep or to harness all that contradiction and actually put it to work around a central will, we may add a third, the impossibility of sleep, of rest, of self-conquest, or conquest of the world. A person with a confused soul suffers from psychic insomnia. He is spiritually impotent, too addicted to the new, to the complicated, to new theories, to his own stories, either to finally rest or to truly resolve things. Some will seek escape, but others, incapable of final escape, of resting on anything at all, because again, they have no center, will turn their wheels to exhaustion. The sleeper is the Gnostic who wants out. The endlessly restless conspiracy theorist is Voegelin's Gnostic who wants to eminentize the eschaton, bring about total revelation not as a spiritual state, but as a final, merely contingent explanation for things. Owens is hurting her cause, Catholicism, conservatism, Israel criticism, infecting tradition and political dissidence with sloppy thinking and spiritual deviance. But she's also caught in a very popular vortex of ideas. A vortex that does end in full-blown Gnosticism if no one close to her stops her from going down that path. But she's only a symptom. Today, conspiracy theory Gnosticism ends up converging with the very evil it wants to resist. The public sphere needs to be fought for, as do our minds. Our attention spans need to be long enough to absorb information without jumping to the next most exciting bit of information or hypothesizing the most exciting theory. We also need the right kind of information. A breadth of historical knowledge can do a lot to dissuade us from weaving spurious accounts about how things work. We of course need to know classical arguments against bad ideas, because really every idea is an old idea as well, and we need to know our logical fallacies. In practical terms, the shibboleth for being a political ally isn't whether you espouse a traditional faith, you're Catholic, you're willing to criticize Israel, or anything else. Having the right opinion matters, but it matters to have the right opinion for the right reasons. Spengler's second religiousness is indeed essentially Gnostic in Voegelin's sense, and is precisely what Nietzsche diagnosed as the mixed personality's desire to escape, which I am describing as an incapacity to escape, a constant hamster wheel running around, different information, different theories, because you have no center in which to rest. And this is at least Guénon's pseudo-tradition, which can easily become proper counter-tradition, a counter meaning a proper formal rejection of metaphysical truth, an embrace of the idea that the world is basically chaos, the creation of evil, because God is not omnipotent, so he's not present in that creation or doesn't exist. The return to tradition meme cannot be left to the fuzzy-headed, uneducated, intellectually incompetent, passionate, unstable types. You have to find your center, sensitize yourself to beauty, and fasten politics to actual analysis. Okay, that was a lot, but hopefully you enjoyed that. I will get into more of this stuff. I want to do a video on the techno-singularity. I want to do a video on Prometheus. I want to do a video on the archetype of Saturn. There's a lot of symbolic stuff that's going to be coming down the line, even though it's not as popular on the channel as like the more political stuff. Thank you very much for watching. Buy me a coffee. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Join me on Substack and Twitter. You can become a paid member on Substack. Thanks a lot for watching again, and until next time.